Wow. It's that time again. Whoa! Whoa! I need a Bible. I'm too lazy to grab one. She is better.
Hey, you
I heard that he is better. Yeah, I'm not gonna take those two because Sam is all on.
Sam, can I leave my liquor in the kitchen?
I was got one.
Welcome one and all to our Wondering Circus. I'm sorry, it's not our circus.
There's 500 people compared to I'm assuming there's 10 more people here.
No, that Cameron's right there. Oh, Cameron's right there? That's Cameron's trick. It was all a lie. Let's sit in the chairs that are harder to abuse. If you're lacking a chair, you can go grab one of those blue ones over there. Harder to abuse.
Well, those blue chairs are also
The wheelie chairs are easy to abuse. The beanbag chairs are easy to abuse. A normal chair that has steel legs, hard to abuse. Yeah, there's still that one little opening. Alrighty, guys. let's quiet down. We're going to start with some prayer because we don't have a worship leader today. We're just going to go without. I know. Weston did a great job for service.
I can play drums.
I can play the
I didn't want to throw him into the lion's den second service. It was a little calmer for service.
Hey,
Do it!
let's do it.
Do it!
I'll play the kazoo.
You were on one for a while.
I know. Yeah. I can play the bass guitar.
I was going to kick you off. So do it.
Hey, we got a worship team right
We
now.
actually have chairs.
I'm good. Hey, we got a worship team. We got a piano player. We got a bass player. Okay, whoa. Who's the piano?
Start it up. It's not happening today.
I'm not a singer.
Start it up.
I am.
All right, guys. I'll ask one more time. I know it's hard. Can you guys be quiet enough that we can pray? Okay. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for a place to gather with other believers. Help us to encourage each other this morning. Help us to answer questions this morning. Help us to learn about you this morning. Just bless this time we have in your word. We ask that in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so last week we were looking at Genesis 5 and 6. Anyone remember what happened in Genesis 5 and 6?
No.
Noah? Okay, good guess. Anyone else?
The first.
You guys can peek. It's not cheating. It's a Bible. You're allowed to open it.
What?
What happened last week? Does anyone remember Genesis 5 and 6? Yo.
First murder.
The first murder, not 5 and 6, but that did happen in a prior week. But not chapters 5 and 6. Anybody remember 5 and 6? We kind of skipped 5. I don't know if you remember that. We glazed through 5. I turned 5 into a timeline. You remember that?
Yep, I remember that.
No.
Basically, chapter 5, you go look at it, is just a big long list of this guy had a son named this, had a son named this, had a son named this. It's the descendants of Adam. So we did a timeline. It was all the way from Adam on the tippy top left, all the way down to Noah and Noah's 3 sons on the bottom right. You guys remember that? There was like a flood over there, there's an ice age, Tower of Babel, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that was last week. Then in chapter 6, we also saw last week, God tells Noah, floods are coming, get to building. I want you to build an ark. Now, we find out this week how old he is when the flood arrives. He's 600 when the flood arrives. Last week, when God spoke to him, we know he was older than 500, because we have a few facts we can kind of stack at the window. We know that by the time he was 500, he had all 3 of his sons. We know by the time he was 600, the flood came. And we know that somewhere in the middle, all 3 sons were married. And after that point is when God went to him and said, build an ark. So somewhere between him being 500 and 600, God comes and says, build an ark. So probably more than 20 years after he's 500, but probably less than like 50 years after he's 500. We don't know exactly. So he has somewhere between like 80 and 50 years to build the ark. Kind of a long time, but it's a really, really big boat. Do you remember how long it was?
Really long.
Yeah?
Wider than this room is long.
Yeah?
And twice as long as the church.
Twice as long as the church. Yeah, if you wanted to walk it, it'd be all the way from the back fence to the sidewalk. That's how long the ark would have been. It's a pretty long boat.
For that many animals.
Well, yes and no. It's also 3 stories tall. And you don't have to take adults if you don't want to. You can take baby animals. That is allowed.
Yeah, we
Shove them into a crate.
They have to be able to survive on their own. So they can't be like infants, little bird can't fly, can't feed itself. Like it has to be able to go out and get food after a year. But you do get to stay on the boat for a year.
Wait, does that mean mosquitoes and spiders are his fault? Keeping them alive? What the heck, Noah?
I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. Mostly because I can't answer it. But also because it's ridiculous. Okay, so this week we're getting into chapters 7 and 8. 7 and 8. We're actually going to get into the flood itself. So, Weston, you want to start us off with the first set of verses? I know, but you had to do 5 verses at first, so this time it's only 3.
When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, go into the boat with all your family, for among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved of eating 1 pair of each of young. Also take 7 pairs of each kind of bird. There must be a male and female of each pair to ensure that all life will survive during the journey.
So God actually waited until Noah was ready, which I think is pretty cool. He didn't say, get it done or else you'll die. He said, get it done. And Noah got it done. And then God said, okay, cool, you're done. Now we go on to step 2. Now God had all this time while Noah was building the ark to physically move the animals to Noah's area. Because there's nowhere on the planet you could live where you would have native species of every species. Like, there's no ecosystem that just supports every single kind of life. So God's been spending some amount of time while he was building the boat, moving in pairs of animals to Noah's location so that he could get them on the ark. Now we also find out, because he tells them, take them with you, he doesn't say you have to corral them. Maybe he had to corral them? He doesn't say you have to, talk them into it, you have to, chase them onto the ark, you have to get them in there. But maybe he did. Like, it's not entirely clear how much of this is God's miraculous hand making the animals do this, and how much was Noah and his family just chasing chickens into a giant boat.
That's why you brought him
We don't really know. We don't know for sure. It does say they walked in pairs, and that's why you usually see in all the artwork the big long conga line of animals, because animals don't typically just walk in nice neat pairs. That's pretty weird, actually. So he also says take 7 pairs of anything you're allowed to eat or sacrifice. You can eat it, you can sacrifice it, take extra. 7 pairs of that one. So that would be like all your barnyard animals, all the classic goat, sheep, cow, chicken, all that stuff. But it would also be things you can sacrifice like the lambs, turtle doves, all that kind of stuff. They were allowed to sacrifice. So, okay, Johnny, you've got verses 4 and 5.
7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth. And it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped the earth. Until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him.
So he's given a week. He's been gathering food for years. He's been gathering animals, and now he has 1 week to get it all on the boat. Which it might sound like a long time. 7 days to load a car. That sounds like excessive. 7 days to load an ark, a cruise ship. Yeah, that sounds like you're actually stretching things a little bit. That sounds hard. Yes.
Number 7. Why?
Number 7. Why?
It's like God's favorite number is 7.
Yeah, basically.
11 and 12. Why is
Mostly just 7.
it's
Yeah. He has meanings he likes to bury into these numbers. 7 is the number of completion, the number of it's done. 8 is the number of new beginnings. 12 is the number of inclusion. We've got everything. 3 is the number of himself. So you don't find 3 all over the place. He doesn't use it about a bunch of stuff. It typically is only used when he's pointing back to himself. So he has a lot of little numbers he has favorites of, but they have meanings. It's not just like, I like it. It means something. 40 means temporary. It will not last forever. That's what 40 means. Mm-hmm. In the desert for 40 years. Yep. Yep. It's generally also a trial. So it's like a trial is promised to not last forever. Kind of rolls both together into one pot.
30 days, except you have to put in your credit card.
Yeah, so 10 extra. Okay, you've got the next set of verses. You've got from 6 to 10.
Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. He went on board the boat to escape the flood. He and his wife and his sons and their wives, with them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along with them. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, just as God had commanded them. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth.
Okay, so God did what he said he would do. Noah did what he said he would do. You'll see this a lot in these chapters. You'll see it in other chapters too. It says things twice. You may have noticed, like, I feel like we just read this. That's what God says. Do the thing. And then the following verse or verses will be, they did the thing. And so you just keep hearing the same thing twice. Because there's the first time where God says it, there's the second time where they do it. So they did exactly what God said. There's also a call out to his age, which is kind of cool. All right. Jediah. Or Caleb. We'll go with Caleb.
So Noah was 600 years old on the 17th day of the second month. All the underground water erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty
Torrents.
of the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights.
Okay. So once again, calling out special numbers of God. It's temporary. It's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights, but it's going to feel like forever. 30 days in, it's going to feel like the rain will never stop. You know, the earth is pretty much flooded by 30 days. Probably going to need all 40. And it's still raining. That's got to be depressing for the 8 people locked up inside that boat. Is this going to be forever? Yeah, I'm sure the animals didn't like it either. Caterpillars are so dumb. Okay, so what do we get from this though? Well, this is interesting. This part right here, people just took it on faith for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that this was true. That water came up from underground. But for a long time, we didn't really understand how this could work. A lot of people were thinking like springs. Springs were letting out water. And that's possible, that's some of it. But it's interesting, we found over thousands of years of doing science that there's actually water coming up onto the Earth's surface from under the crust. So not just water trapped in the soil, not just water trapped in the dirt, not just water trapped in the crust, but water's coming up from under the crust, and we've been missing it for hundreds of years. We haven't noticed. And that's because it comes up with the magma as it pours out of the volcanoes, as it erupts, and when it's that hot, you don't see it. It's steam. So all of our volcanoes to this day still do this. They still let out water from under the crust. You just don't see water coming out of volcanoes because it's so hot, it's just shooting straight up into the sky. It's just steam as soon as it comes out. It never had a chance to be visible, flowy water. So this is something that's been going on the whole time. And what God's doing here is he's using all of his natural processes that he has at hand. And he's using all of them at once to increase the amount of water above the crust. Now this is going to do some crazy things. If you take the amount of water that would be required to cover the earth, you just run those numbers, calculate that, and then you surmise that there wasn't that much water before the flood started. So there was this amount of water, and now there's this amount of water, and so then you have the difference, and you know how much water had to get added, and then you try and figure out, okay, well, where was the water before? Well, if it was underground, or up above the earth as a giant ice shield, whatever the case is, you got to split the difference somewhere and say a lot of it was underground. That means the plate tectonics would have been different before than after the flood. And to get from the different before to the different after, you have to go through a transition in the middle. So what this tells us, is kind of cool actually, is that to get to the tectonic state we're in now, to go through a transition, to come from where we were before, you would have a period of time in the middle where you are going to see plate tectonics like no one's ever seen them before. Plates moving at relatively lightning fast speeds. I mean, lightning fast for a giant rock the size of a portion of the earth, anyways. So the whole concept of Pangea, I don't think it's crazy, I don't think it's weird, I just think it's wrong in the sense of how, when, and how fast. I really do think that our continents were vastly different before the flood than they are now. And I do think that our continents have been moving and drifting at the same rates we see now, but only since the flood. I think based on what we're seeing in terms of the water, based on the kind of erosion that we see in the fossil record, we had to have ridiculous amounts of water moving from under the plates to above the plates. And in that process, you have a huge change in the buoyancy of the plates, allowing them to move way quicker than usual, allowing lava to come up way more than usual. When you go up into the northern parts of Russia, you guys ever looked at the lava fields in science class up in the northern parts of Russia? Okay, well, no, not like physically go to Russia. It's underground. You're not just like gonna walk up there and be like, oh look, there they are. Like it is the ground. It's just everywhere when you go up there. So when you go back and dig in Russia, up in those northern parts, what we found over time is that most of that upper part of the continent didn't used to exist. Most of Russia was not there before, and it was added in through eruptions. And we're not talking like volcano where there's like a peaked mountain and a little hole on the top, and the lava comes out. No, 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 no. Okay, we're talking the most super volcano you could possibly imagine. So it kind of looks like this. First, you've got like little pimple volcanoes popping up all over the place. So you hit like teenager Russia, and they're just everywhere. And they're spilling out, and it creates like a blanket of lava across the old was always there Russia. And then what happens gets really interesting. It all solidifies as it all hits the surface and stays there for a while and gets covered over by water. And then, because it's all covered over and cooled and solid, you have this balloon. It's one solid, airtight stretch of cooling rock. And the pressure's still underneath it. All that pressure is still building, but now it's not dirt and rock that can crack and move. It's one giant balloon of stretchy, cooling lava. And the pressure builds and the pressure builds and the pressure builds. And then a sizable piece, like an eighth to a quarter of Russia, goes boom. The balloon pops, and a large portion of the continent goes whee. And then the lava just comes out. The magma is just flying up and lava blowing everywhere, and you now have continent-sized flow and explosion of lava. This would be like the most devastating eruption of all time, and all we see is the record of it. We just see like the lava fields. We see the chunks. You know, there's no volcanoes left. It just had a conniption fit, and everything went everywhere. So in this process, though, would be the ability to release more water quicker from under the crust than we've ever seen before. The amount of water you can put out of a volcano is very, very small in comparison to what you would need to flood the entire planet. What you would need to flood the entire planet is giant holes in the crust, like we actually see in the fossil, in the geological record. That's what we actually find. So when they find those things, scientists scratch their heads and go, well, dang, shouldn't we see evidence of everything that this would have caused? Wouldn't this have been a whole other extinction event? Wouldn't this have been a whole other event of, you know, soot and smoke and everything in the sky? Wouldn't this have been a whole other... And they keep finding all these different things all over the planet that make them scratch their heads and go, gee, wouldn't this have killed everything? And the answer is yes! Absolutely it would. But the problem is when you think that the Earth is billions of years old, you try to put everything in order so that it all stretches out across those billions, so that there was enough time after all those billions for the life to then evolve. But if you shrinky-dink up the time till all the extinction events are basically the one big extinction event, then it starts to make sense how everything managed to survive. Only by the grace of God. Because we are talking about extinction events. When you blow up a continent and rain lava from the sky, you kill stuff. Like, that's just how it works. And yet, we're still here. The animals are still here. How did this happen? Well, again, by the grace of God. Okay, move on to 13 through 16. This one is Jediah.
That very day, Noah went on to the boat with his right leg from the sun. Shem, Ham, and
Japheth.
and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal,
Domestic?
domestic and wild.
Domestic is like that word for trainable, you know, docile animals like farm animals, pets, that kind of thing.
Large and small, along with the birds of prey. 2 by 2, they came into the earth, representing every living being that breathes, male and female of each kind, just as God commanded. Then the Lord closed the door.
This little phrase, thing that breathes, is an old Hebrew phrase in the original language that basically means not swimming animal. So all land animals, birds too, all that stuff. So, you know, take the tortoise, leave the sea turtle, that kind of thing. It's not actually like a species or class or genus or anything like that. It's literally just the can live in the water, can't live in the water. That's the the defining trait right there. Okay, so again, we see the repetition stuff we already read, kind of, except now they're doing it. God shuts the door, they're in there, and now the floods can come. Yeah.
The funniest thing is, like, pretty much like God is putting something in the door, not like Noah or somebody else.
It's a big fat door.
Well, no.
You had to move the animal kingdom through it in a week. Like that's a big door. And all the food too. Like, I mean, maybe they were smart and they stuck all their stored food in the ark before that week. I don't know, but they needed the food in there at some point. Yeah.
What about insects?
Yeah. That one is tricky. As far as we know, it's not in this one. They didn't repeat that part.
Yeah, because
It
there's
was in
like
the last one.
millions of like species of one ant.
Yeah, here we go. Small animals that scurry along the ground is another Hebrew phrase that literally means small animals that scurry along the ground. So it includes rodents and insects all in one weird grouping. Like, that's a strange group when you can stick a rat and a spider in the same pile. Those shouldn't be the same thing, but in Hebrew, apparently they are. So yeah, little weird. I've started a timeline down here for you guys. We'll build this as we continue the story. This one says 40 days. I know that font doesn't really come through. I know, 40 days. But it does say raining. You can read raining, right?
Like right now, like thinking about like Noah having like an ant farm, like a tiny little box. There's just an ant farm.
You gotta have enough ants to feed the anteater, so.
Oh yeah, wait. Oh yeah, wait.
Because there's animals like I'm trying to keep these alive, and then there's animals like I'm gonna use this to feed something.
Oh, poor animals. Sorry, animals.
So like there's two categories there. Did you get the ants out of the ant farm? Ant farm there. Ah, yes.
Like, how did they feed a lot of the animals? Did they bring food to the animals?
Yes, that was in last week's story. God says during the prep for building the ark, also prep for all those same number of years, getting food for the animals.
Also, did like all the animals in the flood stay because like it was in the water?
Yeah, so we actually get that from this story and then normal science. So in the story, he doesn't take anything from the sea. And then in normal science, we can see all the normal sized floods that we've experienced on the planet since this giant one. Fish do die, but they don't all die. So typically after a flood, you will find, if you're that first crew out there, you'll find a bunch of dead fish floating on the top. And they weren't killed because like, oh, too much water, like, that's not what kills them. It's the trees floating around and the rocks rolling on the bottom and all that mud getting in their gills and like, it's a percentage thing. A lot of the fish die, some of them make it. The ones that make it aren't like, yeah, I just surfed on the top, I'm good. Like, they're limping along, right? That was insane. They're traumatized, but some of them make it. So kind of the same thing. I would imagine a bunch of animals in the ocean did die just from the craziness of the flood, and then some of them survived enough to keep going. We do see a lot of animals in the fossil record that aren't alive today, but we see even more that are still alive today. So some of them may have even gone extinct during the flood, but so many of them did not. The ocean kept going. Okay. Yes.
In polar areas, wouldn't there be like hail?
Sure, but remember, as far as we can tell from the fossil record and what we know from the Bible, pre-flood Earth wouldn't have been the same as post-flood Earth. So before the flood, you wouldn't have the same dispersion of super cold at the top and bottom, and then like a little bit warmer, a little bit warmer, a little bit warmer, a little bit warmer, until you get to the super hot in the middle. You would have warm-ish spreading out further. So there would be less of a crazy hot in the middle and a crazy cold at the top, more even, we call it more temperate climate across the entire globe. So places that would enjoy hail, less of that. More places where the rain would just be sleep, yeah. No, I just mean less polar space, like more temperate space. Okay, so
Warm bears.
we read that one, right? Yes, we read that one. Okay. And then in the back row, let's jump all the way back to the back left. Cameron, you can read this one.
For 40 days, the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above. The earth,
That was the end of that last sentence.
as the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks.
Okay, so it rains for 40 days straight. Okay, and so the flood is continuing to rise for 40 straight days. And then at the end of the rise, when it finally gets to its highest point in the flood, it's 22 feet over the tallest mountain. Now, people have run the numbers and tried to figure out, oh, well, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain. Add 22 feet, and then draw a circle around the planet, and then sea level, and subtract, and how much water is that? And like, okay, that's all great math. That's fine. But if you flood the entire planet, you move all the tectonic plates around, you move all the soil and the rocks and everything around in this giant, ridiculous earth covering the flood. The mountains you have now after the flood are not the same mountains you had then before the flood. Like, that doesn't make any sense. For a mountain to just sit there while the planet gets flooded is not realistic. The mountain is made of rocks and dirt. Based on what we see in geology, those rocks and dirt do not just sit still when the flood goes on. They don't just like, that's not what happens. We're talking constant mudsliding and soil movements all over the planet the whole flood long, only coming to rest as the waters come down. So the odds of a mountain just like sitting there like, yeah, whatever. Very, very bad odds. Now we also see mountains growing, shrinking, being formed still to this day. Volcanic activity, tectonic activity, all plays a role. So you can find the general average rates of something like Mount Everest growing to its current size. Based on the two tectonic plates that meet up, the whole Himalayan mountain range is part of a seam between two tectonic plates. So you can rewind that and you can basically guess how tall Mount Everest was back at the end of the flood. And based on that, chances are it was formed during the flood. So the need to cover Mount Everest is not there. Like, that's not how tall the flood would have to be. Because it basically looks like, from what you see of Mount Everest geology, it was formed because of the flood. Yeah.
Might be a stupid question, I don't know, but
It's worth a shot.
were Noah and his family, like, how they were like the only people on the boat, were they the only people that survived the whole flood?
Yes, not a stupid question. You came in late. I think you missed the verse where it actually says the answer to that question. That's all. It actually says nothing that breathed there. So anything that was not fish, whales, sea turtles. If it lived on land and it wasn't in that boat, it was dead. That was it. Yes.
So remember that person that God just like took?
Enoch?
Yeah, Enoch.
Yeah, but he's not on the earth. So not dead, but typically when we say alive, we're implying on the earth. Usually what we're implying. So, yeah.
God is alive.
Yes, but remember that part where we said the thing that breathes air is the thing that lives on land? Remember that thing where his spirit can be heaven, not heaven. I feel like this is all really straightforward. We're looking for loopholes here. Okay. Ah, the pixie dust! I forgot about the pixie dust. Yes, Abby.
Technically, will do read it.
They do, but again, we're operating in Hebrew, not English. So when they say something in Hebrew, their phraseology doesn't always mean exactly what it translates to in English.
So they're dumb.
Also, they did
No, they just existed in a time before we had things like species, genus, family, class. There's another one in there. Phylum, thank you. Like, they didn't have that lingo back then. So their lingo was whatever they made up. We made up that whole system. It's our own invention, right? So when they make up theirs, they get to make it up however they want to. Their made-up version, just like our made-up version, was based on what helped them the most. We're trying to classify things now. They weren't. Their classification was very simple. Does it live on land? Does it live in water? That's it. Now, we've got more record keeping. We've got animals that do both, and that would break their system. But their system is that simple. Like, it's literally the land animals and the water animals. That's the simplicity of their system. So they weren't dumb. It's just all they needed. That's all they cared about. Okay. Can I catch it when I go fishing? So 22 feet over the highest peaks. Not necessarily Everest. Still pretty tall. Still a crazy miracle, but not Everest. Okay. Move on. Caleb in the back.
All of the things on earth died. Birds, domesticated, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on the earth. The earth, livestock, small animals that were scurrying along the ground, and the birds of the sky, all were destroyed. only people who survived the Noah in these days, Noah and those who in the boat, and the floodwaters covered the earth for 50 days.
150 days.
Wait, could you
Okay, so you didn't miss it. The part I was thinking of was when God said it will happen, and then this is now the part. Remember we said it's going to repeat itself. Well, there you go, it repeated itself. This is the part where it actually happens. Earlier we read where God said it's going to happen. So there you go. Answer to your question. Now this thing, 150 days. You got to run the numbers on all this because they actually give you the dates. In the original translation, it's literally year, month, day that all of this stuff happens. And so when we translate it like this, we make it simple for the reader. There is a bit of complexity in this 150 number though, because it's actually 110 plus the 40 from the days it was raining. So there's 40 days it was raining, that's this little slash over here. And then there's another 110 days where the waters rise and fall. And the boat is still afloat. It is still rocking on the waves for another 110 days. Add those two together and you get 150. Okay, so 150 days where the boat is just floating on the waves. Okay, so we're on the open flood seas. All right, what's that?
Okay. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock with him on the boat. He sent a wild what?
A wind.
Yeah. He sent a wind to blow across the earth, and the floodwaters began to recede. The underground water stopped flowing, and the
Torrential.
rains from the sky stopped. So the floodwaters gradually receded from the earth after 150 days, exactly 5 months from the time the flood began. The boat came to a rest on the mountains of Ararat. 2.5 months later, the waters continued to go down other mountain peaks became visible.
Okay, so here's your little slices on the timeline. This little line right here is where the boat comes to rest. So that's 150 days after it started raining. It comes to rest on one of the tallest mountains in the Middle East, mountains of Ararat. And then after another, 2.5 months, they can finally start to see other mountaintops. So that shows you God made sure they actually landed on like the tallest one. He wanted them to stop rocking around as soon as possible. I don't know if you guys have ever been on a boat for a long period of time.
I drove a boat.
Some people can get used to it. Some people, they're just going to be sick the whole time. Some people get their sea legs. So I don't know what the situation was in the boat. I don't know out of the 8 humans, how many were seasick. I don't know out of the thousands of animals, how many were seasick. Say again? Yes, so it's Noah and his wife. Noah has 3 sons, and all 3 sons are married. So add 3 more. So 8 people. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so there you go. End of the timeline. You finally start to see some other mountain peaks. Still not a great time to get out of the boat. You don't want to open the door, get all the animals' hopes up, all the people's hopes up, and then, oh, by the way, there's not even a path from this mountaintop to that mountaintop. You're just stuck on this mountaintop. That would suck. So still not a great time to get out of the boat. And now we'll go to you. I haven't memorized your name yet. What's your name, sir? Malachi. Oh, trying to go. Okay, so we have 2 events here. We've got the raven going out. He had waited 40 days since the peaks of other mountains showed up. He figured, maybe there's something out there right now. So he pops open his little hatch on the top, kind of like a submarine, and lets out a raven. Raven just keeps on flying back and forth all over the place. There's not a lot of birds out there, so it's pretty easy to spot the raven. He figures that's not great. That's not good news. I don't like when the raven is just flying back and forth. It's not fantastic. So he waits a while. Another week goes by. He lets out a dove. The dove just goes out, comes right back. Dove ain't happy. There's food in this boat. There's mud out here. Can I be back at the boat now? So dove goes back in the boat. Yes, gentlemen?
This is like say that
I can rewind.
Noah only made one window.
Apparently, which to me just says you have the smelliest boat ever.
Also oxygen.
Yeah. I wonder sometimes if there wasn't other types of vents that maybe we didn't qualify as a window.
Maybe they have like parts where you can like little decks on the boat.
Little balconies.
I don't know.
Like a real cruise ship.
Maybe a
Ah, sweet. Everybody gets a turn. They like rotate the animals out to the balconies. Yes.
So wouldn't if the waters are higher than the tallest mountain and they're above the water, wouldn't that be low oxygen? Because like when you climb a tall mountain, it's very low oxygen. Then if you're 22 feet above that,
Yes and no. The effect would still be there. But remember, the oxygen wouldn't decrease during the flood. So the amount of oxygen at ground level would still be roughly the same as where ground level was. It would thin out because the Earth would have a greater radius, greater circumference. So the bigger the planet with the same quantity of fluid gases, the thinner the layer would become, but not by a great margin. So it would only thin a little, in essence. Yeah.
and also about last service when we were talking about the
Hmm.
when it says it's 22 feet above the mountain.
Yep.
If the land is still coming up, doesn't that mean the water would still have to be coming up? Because
Keep in mind.
doesn't it say that at the end of the 150 years that stop the water
Days.
from flowing?
Days. Yes.
The days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stop the water from flowing, so doesn't that mean during the 150 days they're still flowing and the land kept rising?
Okay. Good questions. So he's getting into the technicalities of this, and that's okay. So rewind back to the 150 verse. So floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days, but that's not actually when it stopped. Okay. So the rain stopped back here at the end of the 40 days. So the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground, lifting the boat high above the earth. The water rose higher and higher above the ground. The boat floated to the surface. Finally, the water covered even the tallest mountains. And then, no, where's the verse? Was the verse? Oh wait, was that one? Oh, you are correct. The underground stopped flowing. Oh no. So before the 150. So okay, so here's where it stopped flowing out, and it may have even continued to rise for a bit as things start to move and settle. So that's actually what gives us the idea of the tectonic plates floating, is because as they move, they would actually increase the total height of water without new water being introduced into the equation. It's an interesting thing, but you can have the waters change their height up or down without actually putting new water in, just based on how it disperses. So even though the raining and the flooding stops being added to right here, it can still go up and then down. And so somewhere in the 110, this latter portion here, is where the water hits its zenith and then starts to go down. Does that make sense? It wouldn't actually like stop on a dive and then start to lower it all of a sudden. But the rain stopped at the 40-day mark.
But the underground.
So when the ground moves up, that doesn't mean the peak of the mountain moves up at the same rate. You would actually have softening of the soils and a collapsing effect just from the start of the momentum coming from the bottom, the push underneath, and then the water pressing down on the top. So the mountain wouldn't necessarily come up like a spear just because the tectonic plates coming up. Does that make sense? There would be some compression effect from the crazy weights involved. Okay, back to where we're actually at. Yeah, here we go. Did we read that one? I got equal yeses and nos.
No. No, we didn't.
Okay, this is the second Dove set of verses, so I don't think we read that yet.
No, we didn't.
Jonathan, you haven't read that yet?
I haven't.
Go for it. You can read that one.
After waiting another 7 years,
Oh, half the animals are dead. Their lifespans aren't even that long. Okay, try it again.
After waiting another 7 days, Noah released the dove again. This time the dove returned to him. And the evening, in the evening, with a fresh olive leaf.
Whoa.
Do you have another language you prefer? Just keep going. In its beak.
And in this week, then Noah knew that the flood waters were almost gone. After another 7 days, and then released the dove again. This time it did not come back.
Okay. No, it found somewhere to build a nest. It found somewhere to like be.
It got eaten by the mud.
Yeah, that would be sad. It lands the first time. Just okay. So he does this 3 times. Dove goes out 3 times. The second time is when the olive leaf comes back in its beak. That means there's enough time. And really, he is waiting a lot of time. So this makes sense, okay? Other mountains became visible, and then Noah sends out the raven. But there's been 3 weeks in between what the raven saw and what the dove saw. 40 days plus 3 weeks. So like 60, that's like 2 months between what the raven saw and what the dove found on the last flight. So there's been time for an olive pit to sink into the mud. There's been time for a tree to sprout. There's been time for a leaf to grow. It's not a huge amount of time, but it's actually just enough time. So he comes back with the olive leaf. Noah's all stoked. Stuff's growing again. Now this has to be a real concern. He trusts God, but the ability to flood the entire planet, and he wasn't tasked with saving the plants. He wasn't tasked with that. And yet God's somehow going to get this to work. I'm sure there's some part of Noah's head that's going, but how? How is he going to get it to work? How are trees going to come back? How are plants going to come back? How are things going to come back? I've got the animals. Who's got the food? When we get off this boat, when we run out of supplies, what comes next? Is the planet even going to be worth living on? Or is it going to be like the boat life? We live out of the ark from now on. This has got to be a real concern. So the fact that he comes back with a leaf in his mouth, a freshly grown leaf, not something that just like, floated on the water and got all soggy and sad. Like that's really, really encouraging. Yeah.
I wonder.
Yeah.
After that flood was over, what did Noah do with the boat?
With the boat, I don't think you get to move a boat that big back then. You would need a crew. You would need machines.
No, you need a really big.
You just push it over the
Need
mountain.
some wheels.
So you just have
Push it downhill.
You just gotta push
You
it.
need the world's biggest boat race.
I have a question for you. What happens at the bottom of
Depends how many.
It's like going down a mountain on a sled. Like there's a point where you want the sled to stop because if you go long enough, you get to a speed where you wish you didn't get on that sled.
You just have like a really gradual curve, so it's slows
Really
down.
gradual.
Yeah.
Happy
So
Happy birthday.
Dove doesn't come back, but you guys will notice this is not the end of the timeline. 2 things are at play here, and we don't know which one's the bigger factor. Okay, 2 things are at play. One of them, Noah's not sure about what's outside the boat and whether or not he can live off of it. Number 2, God didn't say get out of the boat yet.
He just goes for it.
So the question is, why is there this much timeline left? Is it Noah patiently waiting to see what God says? Or is it Noah anxiously, unsure, never going to move unless he's certain? We don't really get to know. The story is not told to us in such a way that we get to say, ooh, it's a weakness in Noah, or ooh, it's a strength of Noah's. He waits because God didn't tell him to go yet, or he waits because he's so scared. We don't know. It's one of those 2, I think, because he could have left as soon as he saw evidence that plants were growing. He could have sat out the plants, immediately started harvesting and planting and harvesting and planting. Let's get this farm life going again. Let's get this ecology going. Or maybe he's scared. You know what? There's some food left in the boat. Let's just not leave. It's great in here. We're living food forever. Who knows? All right. Then we get to 13, 14, J-Rock.
Noah was now 601 years old. On the first day of the new year, 10.5 months after the flood began, the flood waters had almost dried up from the earth. Noah lifted back the covering of the boat and saw that the surface of ground was drying. 2 more months went by, and
So he looks out and sees the ground is drying. So that means previous to that, what he was seeing was water and mud. And so now, at this point, after almost a year, this is 10 and a half months. So imagine you're starting on January 1. This is like halfway through November. If you were starting on January 1, this is halfway through November. He looks out and he sees the ground is drying. Drying. With an ing, not a dry.
It's
Drying.
a dry yeet.
Yes.
So Noah was 601 years old, like that was a thing.
Yeah. You missed the beginning. I forgot that. He was 600 when it started. Somewhere in here was his birthday. Can you imagine the on the ark birthdays?
Wait, did you
Here,
mention
you get
he
the
lived
eggs.
601? He
Happy
lived longer.
Happy birthday.
You're special.
That's how you sing happy
Wait.
birthday. Yeah.
Did he live longer than 600 or what? Like how old?
Yeah, he got older. Noah's the second oldest guy on record.
Who was the first?
Methuselah. Methuselah lived to 969. Noah was off by 19 years. He made it to 950. He beat Adam. Adam only made it to 930. 900 anything's impressive. Like, don't get me wrong.
Ooh,
But,
Anything above
yeah, that's true. 100's impressive.
Wait,
Who am I
900
kidding?
what?
So he was 950. The first place guy was Methuselah. He was 969. And I think Adam's third, he was 930. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it's a different third place or something.
Jesus.
But I know those are their ages. I got that part down. Okay. So finally the earth goes dry. It's not all soppy, squishy, wet anymore. And then, yeah, that's another good point. Do you even try to open a door that got shut? Does that just sound like a stupid idea?
No, it's cold water. No, it's cold
God
water.
shut the door. All right, boys, let's push.
Dude, the elephant.
Yeah, never mind. Forget that. All right, you're next. Don't hide behind your can. 15 through 17.
Okay. Then God said to Noah, "Leave the boat, all of you and your wife, and your sons and their wives. Release all the animals, the birds, the livestock, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, so they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth."
God gives the commands, and then we see that small repetition as he obeys.
So Noah, his wife, and his sons and their wives left the boat, and all the livestock and birds came out of the boat.
And that's what I love. At this point, you would think it's a free-for-all, but no, God's still in control. And so he actually makes the animals walk out two at a time in their pairs to go off to where they're going. Because honestly, if he didn't do that, think about the consequences, guys. If you open a door from the boat where God's been keeping every animal docile and kind, and the lion hasn't eaten all of the gazelles yet, and you open the door and you just let them go nuts, like, I mean, that's an insane battle royale. That would be nuts. Thousands and thousands of carnivores and herbivores all meeting within the space of like a 12-foot opening. That would just be a bloodbath outside. It'd be terrifying. Terrifying. So instead, God just keeps them calm and cool, and they all walk out in their pairs.
And then
And
at
I
the
kind
end,
of
they
like,
split off.
I kind of imagined, for some reason, like a schoolyard instance where like you've been in the class all day, the teacher's been watching over you, and the door opens, and you all run out. But you've all like pre-decided we're gonna play this game when we get outside. So you can't start the game until everyone tags the fence.
So
Like,
it's a
if
game
you start at the
called-
door, everyone loses. It just stands at the door and goes tag, 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 tag. So you got to go run to the fence first. Then we're safe. Then you can run off. So I kind of imagine like the herbivores getting a head start, and the lions are like sitting by the door. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then eventually, ready or not, here I come. All the lions run out. All the tigers run out. The cheetahs run out. This is my imagination. I'm just letting you inside. It's of no benefit to you. I wanted you to know. That's how I see things. Okay. All the science in my heart. Animal hide and go seek. Okay. Last set of verses, the very, very end. Would you read them for us?
Then
Go
Noah
for it.
built an altar to the Lord, and there he sacrificed his burnt offerings, the animals and birds that had been approved for that purpose. And And the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice and said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of the human race, even though everything they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood. I will never again destroy all living things. As long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night.
All right, now this is not the only promise God makes. We're going to continue with his promises next week when we get into chapter 9. But this is a beautiful, beautiful promise right here. If you recall, back at the beginning of Genesis, when Adam and Eve first brought sin into the world, he cursed the ground. Their sin brought on a curse. The curse was the earth is not just going to give you food anymore. You have to work for it. There's not just going to be enough berry bushes to keep everybody fed. You have to actually do stuff to make stuff. You're not just going to walk through the forest and stumble upon a natural orchard. It doesn't work like that. So that was the original curse. You got to work hard to get anything out of this earth. And then God says here, I'm not going to do any more of that style of curse. No more will I curse the ground because of their actions. I would call the flood judgment, but I definitely think it qualifies as like a cursing on the ground. Because like the ground used to have a lot of plants and now it just has mud and it's got to start over from scratch. That's not great. I don't know if that qualifies as a curse, but it's not great. And so God just says, I ain't doing that anymore. We're done with that. I don't care how bad it gets because, you know, it's bad. I mean, before the flood, he literally said the phrase that everything in their thoughts was always evil all of the time. Like, that's a terrible phrase. There's no loophole in that phrase. But what about sometimes? What if it's not that evil? No, the phrase was completely, all of the time, no exceptions. That's bad. And he says, you know what? Even if it's that, I won't curse the earth anymore. Not the ground. It's seen enough hardship. It's been bad enough. Yes?
Wasn't there like a rainbow?
That's next week. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just next week. You're totally right. Okay. So one more thing about this promise, though. Check this out. He says that as long as the earth remains, okay, so until we nuke it and blow the whole thing up,
And the earth is like not remain.
until it's little fragments of planet floating past the moon,
I don't want
Okay.
the earth to remain.
as long as the earth remains, there will be, check this list, planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night.
But what about autumn?
Dude, you live in Chico. Autumn is a lot. Okay. Autumn is only there in the sense of it's now winter and I can still see the brown leaves before they turn to mush.
What about spring?
Spring is 1 week in Chico. You get 1 week of spring. That's it. If you ever see a kid's little like timeline in the schoolroom up on the wall where it's like 4 equal sections of spring and summer and fall and winter, that's a lie. It doesn't exist like that. I don't know where you have to live to get a quarter of the year to be spring. I might consider moving there, but not in Chico. You get 1 week of spring and then it's summer for 5 months. That's Chico. Okay. Fall is the leaves turning brown, but frankly, in Chico, I mostly just think that summer cooked them because it lasted too long. I don't think that fall is actually like the weather getting cool. No, it's just winter now. The leaves are done with it. They've had enough. They're on the ground.
Hey, at least all the mosquitoes die. That's like a miracle.
And that's why the promise is you get summer and winter for sure. Spring and fall, they're bonuses. They're not part of the promise, though. It's not guaranteed, okay? Like if you're lucky, you get spring and fall. Okay. So, you know what? Global warming is kind of scary. A lot of people get afraid about that kind of stuff.
What about nuclear winter?
Or I don't know, giant plastic ocean floating island things. Yeah, okay. So sea turtles with their mouths all stuck in the soda can rings, like straws stuck in their noses. Are you sure they didn't just want like a nose ring? I haven't. They don't have fingers. How do they do that?
No, someone's.
A human. A human is pulling the straw? How do you know they didn't put the straw up there? Because their video is viral. Like, why wouldn't they do that? All right. That's not the point. I don't know how the straw got
Save
up
the
there.
turtles, kill the humans.
How's it going viral on the internet?
I just want to set the record straight. I think as Christians, we should not be afraid of any sort of environmental impact. We should not be afraid of it. I do think, though, that if you look back in Genesis, based on what God says to Adam and Eve, one of the very first commands to ever exist on this planet is be responsible for it. That is one of the oldest commands in the world, is God telling the humans, be responsible for the planet I'm giving you.
We're not doing that.
So I think there's a double-edged sword here, though. Taking care of the planet is important. Being afraid of it failing is a bad idea. So it's to exercise authority and to take responsibility for our actions, to take care of what God's given us, but to never be afraid of the earth failing. Because operating in fear is not something that we as Christians are called to. We are not called to operate in fear. Fear does not make you make good decisions. If you're afraid of the planet failing, you're not going to make a better decision than someone who's just taking responsibility for their actions. So, you know what? You spill some oil, you should clean it up. You know? Like, you make some bottles and cans, you should collect them when you're done with them. Like, that's just cold, hard logic. You made it, you clean it. It's yours. Don't just dump it on the animals. But at the same time, don't be afraid of the planet all going down the tubes and the global warming killing us all. That's not realistic.
That's unavoidable.
It's not realistic. God's made the promise. It's going to keep on being cold and hot, not just hot. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to keep on being pleasant. He doesn't say in that sentence somewhere, it'll be comfy. He doesn't say that. He says there'll still be a planting, there'll still be a harvest.
It'll still be a
There'll
house.
still be cold, there'll still be hot. There'll still be summer, there'll still be winter. Does that mean we can't make it worse? No.
Still be
We can make it
cold.
worse. Does that mean we can't make it better? No, we can make it better.
We can
We can nuke Australia. The kangaroos are too bouncy.
But the point, John,
Well,
is that we
like,
should
right,
never
so
give
really
in a
this
sense of
is it.
fear. We should never operate in a sense of fear.
The only way we can make this
So the question is motivation. That's really the question. Are we going to outlaw straws because we're afraid of the consequence of straws existing? Or are we just going to be responsible with the straws? That's it, really. Just be responsible. That's all it comes down to. So if it's more responsible to make a biodegradable straw, make a biodegradable straw. Like, I don't care. Just be responsible.
It's called a jerk straw.
No, that's not
called
biodegradable.
picking up
That's degraded.
picking up your cup and doing this.
No,
It's
just
not
eat the
straw.
cup altogether.
I don't like
Don't just eat
Hey,
the cup.
no straw.
It's a
And
reusable
I don't
straw,
like
Wesley.
Straw!
That's why you burn it.
There's no
Still
such thing as
straw.
That makes bad plastic straws.
So-
Wait, plastic water bottle. Burn it.
But
Johnny,
it's reusable.
you'd like to have more outbursts? I would like you to leave the room. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The point at the finish of all this, at the close, is that God is the one who actually did the most damage to the planet in this instance. So the point isn't make sure the planet stays nice and hunky-dory. The point is do the will of God. So the same with environmentalism. If there is something that you think God is calling you to do, go do that. If you want to go make compost in your backyard, I think it's fantastic. Do it. You'll have probably healthier plants for it. But this should not be someone's life mission to go out and fix other people's attitudes and problems. Our mission is to follow God's will. So ask him really what he wants you to do. Is it to go off the crazy train with, protect everyone from everyone's selves? Or, like in Noah's instance, protect exactly what God told you to protect. Noah wasn't tasked with going door to door and saying, hey guys, you should get on the ark with me. It's going to be bad. Get on my boat. That wasn't his job. He wasn't told to go around and save everyone. Now, our job's different. It's not Evan Almighty in everyone's house. We're not all told by God, hey, build an ark, save everybody. That way. It's pretty funny. But God has given us a job, and Noah did his job. He did it well. And then when he's done, he thanks God. I love that. That's an amazing picture. When the whole thing's done, and he gets off the boat, he's not like, oh, I lived. How amazing. I'm so cool. I made this boat. That's how I stayed alive. He gets off the boat that he made, and he thanks God.
God helped him. And he pushes the boat
God
off.
told him to build it. God kept them alive. God kept the animals docile. All those things that God did. But my point wasn't that.
It's a
My point
burning
was,
boat.
sometimes God gives us a job to do, and we can either say no,
The dumpster fire.
or we survive a trial in our life, and instead of returning back to God and saying, thank you, God, for getting me through the trial, we go, wow, I can't believe I did that. Oh, man. I really survived. Look at that. How cool I was. I am so impressed.
I bet the first time
It's tempting. It's really tempting when you get off of some giant emotional roller coaster and you were nearly killed to go like, wow, I can't believe I made it through that. So cool. I'm so strong. Look how strong I am. Did you ever hand up previously like, before the flexing?
What?
Did you ever hand up?
No.
Oh, not before the flexing you hand up. Yeah, it's set.
I bet the first time it rained after this, everyone got really scared for a second.
Oh yeah, that'd be freaky. I think that's part of the like the awesomeness of the rainbow as God's symbol. Because God didn't pick like some miracle thing he was creating, like, this is the symbol, I will make it to the air. Like he picked the thing that naturally occurs after rainstorms. Like it's just it happens. So every time you get spooked like, oh flood, and then the rain goes away and there's the rainbow, it's like, no, remember how God said he wouldn't do that again? So it's like it's a pretty good reminder. It comes out like most of the time right after the rain.
Except for that one
The first
time
rainbow.
There is some directionality and position of the sun and you to the rainstorm that needs to happen. So yeah, you don't really see it, but it's always there, whether you see it or not. Yeah.
He said he would never like curse the ground.
Mhm.
What about like curse?
Ooh yeah. So the promise is specific. He says, "Curse the ground because of the evilness in the heart of man." So punishment in response to that will never be cursing the ground. Also, tornadoes are not necessarily a curse. When God says curse, and it's God saying it, keep that in mind, it's a change to the current natural order of things. He is altering the natural order when he makes that curse occur. So a tornado is not an alteration of the natural order. It is part of the natural order. So when he did the first curse back in the garden, he was altering the way the ground and the plants operated. Previously, the ground and plants were just growing and making food all by themselves. You just walk around, there's food, there's food, there's food, there's food. You just reach up and grab them and just grow it for you all the time. That's awesome. That's not how it is anymore. So the curse was the changing of that natural order. Likewise with the flood, giant worldwide floods are not normal. That's not a normal natural order event. That is a change in the natural order. Tornado, that's just hot and cold air mixing in a very spectacular way. That's pretty normal. So, all right. I think that's it for today. Takeaways from this: don't freak out about the environment. Just be wise with what God's given us. He's actually given us a really cool place to live. Take care of it. Do the job that God gives you. Do the job that God gives you. When God gives you a job, do it. Take it as sacred. The fact that God's giving it to you makes it sacred, even if it seems like a really lame job. It could be cleaning a bathroom. It could be talking to a human. It could be picking up your straw and throwing it in the trash can. It doesn't matter. If God gives you a job, it's sacred. Do it like it's sacred. Okay, that's it. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. Thank you that you have made such an awesome promise to us. In your word, recorded it so that we can read it all these thousands of years later. Thank you, Lord, the earth is going to continue until you're done with it. Until the end. Until you get to remake it once more into something perfect. Thank you, Lord, for that promise that we don't have to worry about our environment. We can work on it, we can protect it, we can do all sorts of wise things for it, but we don't have to worry about it. Thank you, Lord, for that peace. Thank you, Lord, that you've entrusted something so mighty to us. That you would put that much trust in us when we're not really worthy of it is a true gift and a blessing. And thank you, Lord, for your love and your salvation and your provision. That when judgment is coming, you always make a way to be saved. Lord, impress upon us, help us to understand just how important it is that we bring that salvation to the people around us. That we are not living in the days of Noah, where everyone was a lost cause and Noah was just told to save himself, Lord. We are living in the last days, where there are so many who can still be saved, and we have a part to play. Thank you, Lord, that we live in a day where hope is not lost, but rather we have infinite hope. Help us, Lord, to operate in that, to live with that, to bring your gospel to as many people as we can, to share that love that you have for them, to share the message of Jesus dying in their place, making it possible to save them. We thank you, Lord, that all of this is the time in which we live. With our heads still bowed, with our eyes still closed, is there anyone in this room right now that wants to take hold of that promise? Not the promise of the earth lasting, the promise that Jesus would forgive you of your sins if you would just ask. If you put your faith in him and say, forgive me. If you want to take hold of that right now, God has made it very clear in his word that all he requires is faith. That's it. No fixing your life, no cool, crazy action on your part. Just you putting your faith in Jesus, believing in the Son of God that died in your place. So if you're sitting here this morning and you want to take hold of the promise that your sins can be forgiven, I would just ask you to raise your hand so I can tell. God can see your hearts. He knows. I see that hand. You can put that one down. Anyone else here this morning? Just put up your hand to show me. God knows you want to do it. I can't know that. Not until you show me. I see that hand. You can put that one down. Anyone else this morning? Just to say, Jesus, I believe in you. Please forgive me. Anyone else? All right, well, those two that raised their hands, and anybody else, maybe you're too shy and you couldn't get your hand up, but you want to pray this. You want to ask Jesus for forgiveness. Just pray these words in your heart. Repeat after me. Dear Jesus, thank you for dying in my place, for taking my punishment. I believe that you're the Son of God. I believe that you rose from the dead to show your power over death. Would you put in me that same new life? Forgive me of my sins. Make me clean. Make me pure like you. And fill me with your Holy Spirit. Use it to guide me, to show me how to live for you. And when I die, take me into your kingdom so I can live with you in heaven forever. I ask all these things of you, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Right on. Have you guys prayed that prayer this morning? Please stick around and ask some questions if you got them. I want to make sure you got a Bible at your house so you know how to read. A nice, easy-to-read Bible is always good. That makes it hard. Also, if you just prayed that prayer, understand that the words aren't what save you. It's really just
I'll kill myself. Okay, great. I will not fit with tail off the ledge.
Winner, winner! Nice.
Winner, yay! That was the first time
No. All right. Trinity has won the gold medal. I love you guys. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Oh.
It depends.
Oh.
It depends.
I mean, like,
It depends on what, Nate?
It depends what happens today.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant it depended on who it was I was talking to. That's not true. I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday.
Happiness mainly because I have school tomorrow.
Yeah, but it's Hope Academy. It's awesome. Johnny! Ladies, did one of you lose your Arizona can? Who's sitting here?
Sorry, I was taking time to. Sorry, I was taking time to organize the Bibles that people.
Well, thank you. That was a sack. So slow.
I don't want to play good right now. No, I don't want to get tired.